the UK to support, well, largely the rest of the G7 has supported, which is a bid by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, for there to be a global minimum rate of corporation tax across the world to tackle tax avoidance. What chance of success do you think you have?
Well, I'm not sure what chance of success we've got, but I think the bigger issue is that it forces the government to make a choice. Are they on the side of the big tech corporations that shift their profits from country to country and avoid paying the tax that they owe? Or are they on the side of communities across this country and businesses who are undercut by these practices, who want to see the Prime Minister make good on the promises that he made in December 2019 to level up? If we're going to invest in our communities, we need the money to do it. And this is a major way that we could help to rebuild this country.
And we are looking at a 21% global minimum rate, raise an extra £13 billion a year in tax, the UK. It's actually lower than the rate being proposed by the government as it is, 25% for 2023. Is there any chance at all that you're aware that the government will actually vote with you on this?
So far, they've proved very resistant. We're the only country in the G7 that is being resistant to these plans, which is a shame, given that we're the hosts of the G7 and we've got a historic opportunity to right this wrong. I mean, it's important to say, Julia, that this doesn't stop countries setting their own domestic rates of corporation tax. This applies to the very, very big multinationals, the big tech companies who are currently avoiding taxes. And countries are still free to set their own domestic rates. There are many businesses that would still pay the rate that we set here in the United Kingdom. So it is extraordinary that the government is still holding out in their defence at a moment when they should be standing with the people of this country and the businesses of this country that are doing such important work, helping us to rebuild after COVID.
Okay, let's also talk about related to COVID. Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's former senior advisor, is going to give evidence on Wednesday to two select committees in the Commons about, what he says has been, his words, the official plan, originally Plan A for dealing with the COVID pandemic was, he says, disastrously misconceived, and a Plan B had to be bodged amid total and utter chaos. He's criticised everyone from Boris Johnson to Matt Hancock to Jenny Harries, the former Deputy Chief Medical Officer, now promoted to run the replacement for Public Health England. Is he right?
I mean, I have no idea, to be honest. What I find really distasteful is the fact that they've got these allegations flying around. You remember only a few weeks ago there was the row about whether the Prime Minister said let the bodies pile high. Now we've got a row about whether there was a plan to allow herd immunity to rip through the population with the loss of lives. Priti Patel says one thing, Dominic Cummings says another. They can't both be telling the truth. And the picture that's being painted is of a government that is fighting like rats in a sack at the moment, when most of the country, whether in the public or private sector, were going out and getting on with trying to keep this country going, trying to keep people alive, trying to care for our sick and elderly at the moment they were most needed. It just seems really distasteful to me.
But you're talking about herd immunity ripping through the country and the community. That's not what herd immunity is. We're achieving herd immunity through the vaccine. Herd immunity was the policy that was being pursued. I've had Sir Patrick Vallance back in March 2020 did interviews talking about flattening the curve, a broader epidemic so you don't end up with a sharp peak. Herd immunity is how the human race deals with virulent diseases. Why is it now such a sort of, it's a phrase, but a dirty word?
I suppose it depends what you mean. I think Jenny Harris made this point yesterday when she was talking about the very, very different ways in which, as you said, people use the phrase herd immunity. You know, on the one hand, you've got people in government who apparently were suggesting that we should just let the virus take its course.
They weren't. No, but that's not what was being claimed by Dominic Cummings.
Well, look, I'm not, you may know more than I do. I mean, I only know what people like Dominic Cummings are saying. There was a suggestion at one point that that's the plan that was being followed. There's also been a suggestion that the vaccine rollout is the way to resolve this, which, in my view, is absolutely the right.
But the government, the Labour Party position has always been you need to follow the science, capital T, capital S. Must listen to the scientists. The scientists on Sage, who you in Labour seem to think are gods and all-knowing gods all the time, they never discuss lockdown. Lockdown was so off the agenda as something that would be done by a Western democratic country, even though it had been done by a totalitarian state in China. It was not even discussed once. So minutes are out. We know what they discussed. They didn't discuss lockdown before March the 23rd.
Well, no, I'm sure that's right. I mean, we've certainly discussed lockdown with the SAGE scientists since then. We've discussed all of these issues, whether closing the borders more quickly could actually help, which I think, generally speaking, I don't want to put words into scientists' mouths, there are different views, but generally speaking, I think closing the borders more quickly would have been a very important and positive thing
how
to do.
quickly? I mean, the virus was in the country in December 2019. We know that for a fact, and possibly earlier than that.
Well,
it's one thing for New Zealand to close their borders early on when they're on the other side of the world, but in a country with major hub airports where we already had the virus in the country, I'm not sure what closing the borders. I mean, it would look like doing something, and everyone's in favour of doing something, even if it doesn't actually work. But what evidence is there that would have changed the course of the pandemic for us?
Well, look, Jacinda Ardern was one of the first people I spoke to when I took on this post, and she was very clear that there was a huge economic impact on New Zealand. Tourism is one of their major industries, but they felt that they had no choice but to do it to get control of the virus. Whereas here in the UK, within a couple of weeks of taking up this post, in April last year, I was writing to Dominic Raab to say there are many Britons stranded abroad who are coming back into this country in very, very large numbers. We need to get those people home, but we need to do it in a way that is safe. They were ringing my office to say that there were no safety measures at all. There was no social distancing at airports. There was no guidance or advice. People were travelling home on public transport.
I mean, that's very different from closing the borders. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I remember discussing that at the time. That's quite different from closing the borders, though, isn't it? And you do aware, of course, World Health Organization pandemic planning and advice did not suggest closing borders and did not suggest lockdown. It argued against both of those. I mean, let's talk about travel now. One of your colleagues, the Shadow Home Secretary, yesterday called for all amber list countries, but most of Europe and elsewhere, to be put on the red list to stop any travel at the moment, given that we had so much confusion and, frankly, nonsense last week when we had countries that went onto the amber list. You're allowed to travel to them. It's legal to travel, but you have to face self-isolation and lots of testing when you return. But then being told by various ministers, actually, we were not allowed to travel to those countries. Do you agree with your colleague that we should actually put all of the countries in Europe and others that are currently on the amber list on the red list and ban travel?
Well, I think certainly we should introduce mandatory hotel quarantine for those countries. And the reason that I say that, Julia, is because I'm sitting here in Wigan, just down the road from Bolton, where we've been in almost permanent lockdown for over a year now. And the implication of allowing all of that progress to be unravelled very, very quickly, the progress that we've made over the last few months with the vaccine rollout, with the sacrifices that people have made, I honestly think that people can't take very much more of this. And I am really concerned too that the level of confusion in government about the rules around this and the fact that the rules can change very, very quickly, even while you're on holiday, will cause serious, serious problems for many families. It's not just those people who are currently booking holidays now. Don't forget that there are lots of people who booked holidays previously who were told by the travel companies, well, you have to take it at some point when we start to unlock. So they will be being told now, right, go and take your holidays that you've previously booked or lose your money. And for those people, they don't know whether it's safe to do so. They don't know whether they're going to be forced to pay huge amounts in hotel quarantine when they come back and take time off work. It's just not a fair situation to put the public in.
But you're suggesting that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Brits who are currently going on holiday to places like Spain that's opened up today, Greece and Italy as well, although on the amber list, you're saying that we should put them in hotel quarantine. That's totally and utterly unrealistic.
I don't think it is totally and utterly unrealistic. I think the government should be sending a very strong message of caution to people at the moment. If we unlock too quickly,
June the 21st.
Look, Julia, I've said to you many a time on this programme that this has got to be the last lockdown. We know here in Wigan and in Greater Manchester more than almost anyone else what it means to deal with being in almost permanent lockdown for 14 months, and we can't take much more of it, which means that we cannot allow that progress to be unravelled, and we need the government to be far more robust about what is happening.
It can be the last lockdown. Lockdowns are a political choice. It can always be the last lockdown. I must ask you about Belarus before I let you go, though. The extraordinary situation of a Ryanair passenger jet flying between two EU countries, Greece and Lithuania, being basically forced down by fighter jets in Belarus after the president there, Lukashenko, wanted to get his hands on claiming a bomb threat on an opposition blogger who's now been arrested and taken to jail. Your reaction to that and what the international reaction, indeed the reaction of the British government, should be?
Well, it's appalling. It's effectively a hijack of a plane and the kidnapping of a journalist, and it tears up all of the international rules that allow us to function. So there have to be robust consequences. If I were the Foreign Secretary this morning, I would be summoning the ambassador, demanding the release of the journalist and dozens of others who've been detained. But I also think we ought to think very seriously about not flying over Belarusian airspace. I think the Belarusian authorities have proven that that is not a safe or wise thing to do at the moment. I think we should consider blocking flights from the Belarusian state-owned airline, and I think there ought to be further economic sanctions on the Lukashenko regime.
Lisa Nandy, Shadow Foreign Secretary, always appreciate you joining us.